Okay, for our next presentation, we have three speakers: Ralph Lucas, W6RWL, Joe Steinmetz, K6SAT, and Randy Hackbarth, KD6MWI, and they're going to be giving a presentation on the Western States Trail Event Communications.
Well,
welcome everybody. Thank you. So, I talk really loud, so I'm not going to use this thing very much. So,
what?
Yeah, come on now.
You're overmodulating.
Yeah,
exactly.
Just wanted to thank you guys for all your support over the years. I've been doing this now since 1997. And as of last year, I quote-unquote retired from the leadership as it is. And I'm going to, first of all, my daughter will be getting married during the field day and during the Western States this year, the same weekend. So that's a little bit more important than the events and field day, sorry to say. But at the same time, we found that found two people that are willing to take on the duties, and sometimes it can be very hard to do, to get it all organized. It's something that takes about 4 to 5, 6 hours a week, all year long. And then from here on, it can be 10 to 20 hours a week, depending on what's going on. We have 17 different repeaters that we have to keep up and running. You guys, we use 2 of yours, and thank you very much again. We use the YDD repeaters up at Bald Mountain and Squaw Peak, and several crossband repeaters that they keep up. And then we use a lot of other repeaters all over the Sierras. We use Mount Rose, so we get the Reno guys help us out there. We utilize Chris's repeater if we need to in an emergency, and then we have the SAR group, Placer Search and Rescue, and we use their repeaters up in Forest Hill and up in Tahoe, and also in Auburn here. So that kind of gives you just a real quick overview. I want to introduce Joe Steinmetz, who's going to be running all the Western States Run going forward. Okay, stand up. And Randy Hackbarth has graciously taken on the Tevis Cup. And Joe's been helping me with the run and the ride, 7 years. Randy's been doing this Tevis and the run longer than I have. So she was well in the middle of it with SOS, Sweep Riders, and during Tevis she's done all the trailer transport. So with all those duties and being a ham radio operator, I don't know, how many years? Since long time. Okay, so we'll leave that alone. But I think she's been a ham longer than I have. So there's a lot of really good experience here and people that have taken over the duties. So I'm going to give this on to Joe. He's put a really nice presentation together, PowerPoint and all. So I hand the baton off.
All right, thanks, Rob. So, am I loud enough just to talk, or do I need this?
What?
All right. So, I've been doing Western States as well as volunteering at Tevis for the last 7 years or so, and really enjoyed doing it. A lot of things I like. It's kind of, Ralph always calls the Western States weekend the other field day, because it always kind of overlaps with the normal field day. Anyway, I've learned a lot over the last 7 years, and so I put down in this presentation a few things that I've learned that I thought might be interesting to everyone. This applies to Tevis, it applies to Western States. The communication teams are generally the same. The equipment, the repeaters are the same. So everything I'll talk about, there's slight variations on the trail. This is the Western States Trail. It's 100.2 miles long, starts in Squaw Valley, and the Sierra goes all the way down to Auburn. And the tricky part is that it goes through a lot of canyons, very steep canyons that make it very difficult to have communications. All of the aid stations are listed there. There's approximately 21 aid stations that are open from the start of the race to the close of the race, spanning 30 hours. Give you an idea of what the elevation profile looks like. There's about 18,000 feet of elevation gain for the runner, but if you just look at the ups and downs from a canyon perspective, you can see that in some cases there's a lot of difficulty in getting signals out of the canyon. Devil's Thumb, Last Chance, there's basically a swinging bridge canyon. There's just no way to get out of there except with perhaps satellite. So we use crossband repeaters. Same thing with El Dorado Creek. We have coverage from repeaters at most of the other aid stations, but these two are pretty challenging for us. And we continue to try and make improvements and try new things. But this is one of the things that makes both Tevis and Western States very difficult to support over the hours that we need to provide communication. So a little bit of statistics. So I said there's 21 aid stations, many without cell coverage. If everything had cell coverage, things would be pretty easy. But unfortunately we don't. Luckily we get to do ham radio and a very challenging environment.
Joe,
So, yeah.
I want to just add one thing. You know, most events that we do are circular. Not many events are linear. And that's one of the issues. You can't use a couple of repeaters to cover the whole thing continuously. So we use these 17 different repeaters. As we go down, we use a group of 2 or 3 of them in the beginning, and then after we get past there, we use another group, and then we use another group. And we try to have 2 to 3 lines of communication, so if we have an emergency, it doesn't slow down the operation of the system. We can keep it running and then still handle traffic on the.
Yep. So 372 runners, and how many horse riders?
Approximately 200.
200. So a lot of foot traffic, so to speak. A lot of these runners and riders have crews, and crews could be small, 1-2 people. They can be large, 4-6 people. So you have these groups of people associated with every runner or rider moving around from aid station to aid station. So there's a lot of people out there, and to support all of that, we have volunteers. For Western States, it's about 1,500 volunteers out there, of which 80 to 100 are ham radio operators that are helping out at net control or deployed out in the field at aid stations, or sweep runners, or footed sweep or mounted sweeps with radios. We have, at each of the aid stations, we have some form of communication. Generally, there's voice communications at all of the aid stations. Some of them have more advanced communications. We'll talk about that. In the case of Western States, we have 6 teams of sweep runners. Each team will have at least 2 radios. Handheld in the canyons along the course is also challenging. Most of the aid stations are using bigger antennas, mobile radios, have enough power to get out. So there are some challenges with sweep runners and sweep riders. Net control, we have usually 4 to 6 operators. Depends on whether or not it's Tevis or Western States. There's usually 5 shifts over a couple days. So quite a few volunteers, a lot of radio traffic going on simultaneously. Sometimes you're okay with just having a speaker and microphone. Sometimes there's so much going on you need headphones to keep things straight. So Ralph mentioned 17 repeaters for 2018. We're planning to use roughly 11 of those this year for Western states. We also use Simplex frequencies for race management, also for sweep. Sometimes they'll communicate using Simplex or even Simplex to an aid station. Even aid station to aid station sometimes could be Simplex. We also use WinLink and Packet, which is Packet. We have 7 different frequencies there, various gateways and KA nodes and digipeaters. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So some of the methods of communications that we use, so voice obviously is prevalent everywhere. We use 2 meters quite a bit. That's the majority of the modes, of the frequencies. We use your UHF W6EK repeater at net control to reduce interference. So we have so much 2-meter transmissions going. Having UHF is good. We also use 23 centimeters or 1.2 gig to further reduce. We can get into Bald Mountain with 1.2 gigs, so that's very helpful. WinLink. So we use Packet. So some of you guys have done Packet or even WinLink, so the AX25 stuff. We're able to basically send an email via radio from a remote aid station, and it's blazingly slow. It's 1200 baud, but it helps reduce the errors when you're trying to keep track of runners or riders, and you have to capture time, you have to capture the number. Things get transcribed, and whenever you do that, you can reduce errors. And so if you, instead of transmitting everything by voice, we'll transmit it by packet. That reduces the errors significantly. What was the error reduction that you've seen?
It was about 20%. We went from 60 to 70%, and with WinLink it went back up to 80 to 90%.
So we also
Accuracy,
use,
sorry.
that's okay. We also use hotspots. So there's a few places that have cell coverage, and so we take advantage of that. In one case, we'll use a timing mat that is linked via cell, so when a runner goes across with an RFID, it automatically gets transmitted into the cloud, being picked up by net control, where it's put onto a webcast. We can't do that at every aid station, and primarily we do that because up high in the country, there's so many runners or riders coming through so fast that it's really hard to write them all down. And so it makes sense in those locations to use timing mats, and luckily we have some form of cell coverage there to make that happen. In some cases we have Wi-Fi, and so like at Forest Hill there's Wi-Fi there, and or Michigan Bluff there's Wi-Fi there. So in those cases we sometimes will transmit WinLink, but instead of over the radio we'll go over the internet just to keep things consistent. And then sometimes, we'll have to take a picture of a timing sheet and send it via SMS. If that works, we get it. Ultralive is the webcast that we use to keep track of riders, runners, where they're at on the course. So crews know where they're at, so media knows where they're at. And that's where we really reconcile all of the numbers of runners and riders out there, making sure everything adds up coming into an aid station, out of an aid station, so we don't lose anyone. So I want to give you an idea. This is from a Western States perspective. The gear that's used by riders or sweeps are a little bit different. Some runners will have a chest harness, they'll have a radio in there. They may have a backpack with a radio in there. We're not using the OEM antenna, we're using an aftermarket, works a little bit better. In some cases an external mic so that they can communicate easily without having to get the radio out. We recommend that everyone carries a couple of battery packs. We want them to be able to operate for extended periods of time in case there's an injury. They need to stay with someone until there's someone to help. We talk about powering, charging. Sometimes sweeps will have multiple shifts. They'll have to go between aid stations. We want them to charge their batteries while they're going. So at an aid station, this is an example of some of the things I've used at Duncan Canyon or at Last Chance. Generator, battery. In some cases I needed a Yagi in order to get out even to the W6EK repeater from way up there. If you're doing WinLink, you need a TNC. You need some way of sending the emails. You need some sort of laptop. So these are the things that a lot of our WinLink stations use. Some have experimented with solar panels. Everything, we like to be green if we can. So if you can replace a power generator with solar cells, that's good. The aid station likes that too, so it's not noisy. So here's a few pictures of various aid stations over the years. I don't know who everyone is, with the exception of the one kind of in the middle. That's the Western States Race Director, Craig Thornley. He has a radio strapped to his chest. He's a ham radio operator. You can see solar cells are sometimes used. Really is a fun field day-like experience out there. So at Net Control, we have the ARD building at the Auburn Dam Overlook, and it's air conditioned, which, June 23rd and 24th, that could be good. So it's, in some cases, it's people prefer this as to a remote aid station location. We have multiple UHF, VHF radios in there. They're generally all commercial units. They have better selectivity, and we have interference problems, so that works really well. We have an IP phone for emergencies, so when you call Net Control from anywhere out there, it'll ring in this building. It has backups to cell phones. And of course we have internet access there for webcast and such. We're looking at things like battery backup for radios if there was a power failure in the Auburn area, to make sure we're able to continue to operate. One of the things at some of the sites, there's a couple of aid stations where I mentioned we use timing mats. In one case we have a cell link, and in another case we don't. Sometimes that goes over WinLink, but it's hit or miss. So we're looking at maybe trying out an Iridium modem at that particular site. It doesn't make sense for any of the other ones, but we're just trying to solve unique problems at each of the aid stations. So for 2018, these are all the WinLink stations that we're planning this year at Western States. And you can see there's quite a few. We've added 2 or 3 this year. 2 we've added, and then we've added WinLink as a backup to a place that has another way to get in. What this does is it reduces the voice traffic, which is good because we have sweeps and riders, sweeps mounted and footed on the radio, and we still have aid stations that have voice. So by putting a lot of the numbers over WinLink or packet, we really clear up the airwaves. So when Ralph said 17 repeaters and now we're looking at 11, part of the reasoning there is we've reduced the voice load over the event. And these are the voice-only aid stations. El Dorado Creek is one of those steep canyons. And unfortunately, that's one where we have to do numbers, and that's a crossband repeater. Crossband repeaters are very useful, but it's with a lot of traffic, it can be hard on them. So a couple new aid stations that have voice this year is Cal 1 and Cal 3, and so that's down along the Middle Fork, so kind of between Auburn and Forest Hill. And they're just there for emergencies, logistics, top 10 female, male runner numbers, that sort of thing. So we can get by with a lot less in those circumstances. So handheld, maybe a base antenna, very small battery. They're still open for a long period of time just because of the operational time of the aid station is really long. So one of the problems that we've had in enabling WinLink in the lower part of the course is that, again, it's a canyon. And so there's only a few digipeaters that are locally available, one of them being Berryessa, and that is, of course, overloaded most of the time, and the propagation is very difficult in the afternoon. So what we've done is we're putting in a KA node, which is kind of like a digipeater, in the ALT area in Cool. And what this is going to do is allow us to have a hop that's local, and so we'll be able to get to my node, my gateway in Loomis, or Ralph's gateway in Forest Hill with one hop. hopefully giving us much better WinLink coverage in the lower part of the course. And so this is something that's new. We've been testing it. We'll test it on the Memorial Day training runs as well. This is the test station. It's basically a Kenwood V71A used as the radio. You can see the power supply. There's a TNC underneath it and a little cabinet. So this is just sitting in a barn, plugged into the wall with power, and then the antenna that's on the top of the barn. The neat thing about this is that it has line of sight into a lot of Sacramento, the eastern part of Auburn, Michigan Bluff, Last Chance, Cal 2, and almost the river crossing. So it's a fantastic location and one that we can build on if it works out well. And then a few examples. So this is KC6YFG Dave, who helps us out at Lyon Ridge for both Tevis and Western States. So this is his setup that he has. No matter what, he always gets out, whether it's digitally, voice. It's amazing. In fact, when Tevis was rerouted last year, he showed up somewhere and somehow he was sending digitally and he was getting into my gateway at Loomis, and I have no idea how, but he did a great job.
He had a 25-foot pole. He was at on Soda Springs Road, just outside of the Cedars, on the north side of Lyons Ridge, at the bottom of Lyons Ridge, down in a hole, probably 100 feet from the river.
Where the river? Oh, that close to the river?
Yeah, she was just, the river's right there, and it's a North Fork of the. It's where the North Fork splits into two little tributaries. And one's the north of the North Fork and the other south of the North Fork. I don't know. But it was quite a good job.
Yeah, it's challenging sometimes, and that's kind of what makes it fun, is figuring out how you're going to get out digitally or even with voice. Conditions change, right? Propagation changes across the canyons. So that's a lot of the fun. So Duncan Canyon, I've been at Duncan Canyon for a number of years, and this is an example of what I use. Duncan Canyon's a little bit easier than Last Chance. So, the X50A is, close to the smallest single, unit vertical base antenna that you can buy from Diamond. 8800, nice because it has dual VFOs, so you can do WinLink and still hear voice on the other VFO. So from there on WinLink via Berryessa, I can get out to my gateway or KG6SJT and Davis to his gateway. And Duncan Canyon closes by about 1 p.m. So it's before the valley heats up, it's before the propagation gets bad. So I've always been successful using K-Bear from Duncan Canyon. And for voice, W6EK. That's a great wide coverage repeater for Western States and Tevis. It's very much appreciated and very well used. This is my setup at Duncan Canyon. I come there the night before and I'm out of there by 2 the next day. And that's about a 30-foot pole. That's what I started with. But after you kind of learn how things work, pretty much you could almost use a mobile antenna from Duncan Canyon to get out. WinLink's a little bit harder, so that's why I'm using the pole to get up there about 25, 30 feet. So Last Chance is a little bit further down in the course, and it's a little harder to get out there. Certainly for WinLink, I did get affected by propagation as it got later in the day. And so I did have to use 50 watts to get to Berryessa peak reliably through K-Bear. But I was able to do it. The antenna was at 35 feet. It's a 3-element Yagi. Unfortunately, it's pointing right into the trees because at 35 feet, you're just not above the trees yet. What we have to solve this problem is a temporary KA node that's put around Duncan Peak. And we can use that kind of like the one that we have down on Middle Fork and Cool to allow us to make smaller jumps and not have to go so far in the afternoons. In this case, we used Bald Mountain the signal strength with W6EK in the last chance is pretty marginal, even with a good antenna. And that's kind of the setup. It's a large area, but it's a fire road, and the center of the road, it needs to be clear for riders and runners. So you're kind of off to the side. So you can see the trees, you can see the pole. The Aggies pointing right into them. Not the best location, but. So this is the repeater lineup for Western States. As you know, Ralph said, there's 17. You'll see there's some missing because they're not going to be used this year. I just wanted to point out a couple things. So our channel 9 and channel 10 is the W6EK repeater, VHF and UHF. And those are linked, and of course we rely upon those being linked for net control, so we can use UHF to talk to everyone else that's on VHF. Our crossband repeaters are there on channel 6 and channel 7. One covers the Swinging Bridge Canyon, one covers the El Dorado. They're linked into various repeaters. One of them is linked in to W6EK, which means that ideally the carrier tail on the repeater is minimal on race day, because what happens is you have a sweep rider or a sweep runner. They're transmitting simplex essentially into the crossband repeater on 70 centimeters. So they talk, keys up the repeater comes back. If you were on a normal repeater, you would just start talking before the carrier dropped. But they can't do that because it's a simplex link, so no one will hear them. So if the carrier tail is too long, then we miss most of we have to keep training everyone. So short carrier tail is ideal. Simplex channels, we kind of break it up between upper course, lower course, event control. There's a primary and secondary. Sweep riders, sweep runners will use these, and sometimes aid station to aid station. Gets a little bit hard because you're doing WinLink, you're doing voice, and now you need to do simplex. And so there's a lot of dual VFO radios, not so many 3 and quad VFOs, but that's really what you need to cover everything. These are our packet frequencies that we use, so you'll recognize a few of them, like the Berryessa and the Mount Oso and all those. We're in the middle of discovering all of the different gateways that are out there, and also the various digipeaters that are active and are working. And it's not always reliable. For example, Mount Oso right now, a lot of people can't reliably go through it to access other gateways for whatever reason. So I think you all know what a crossband repeater is. So we train the SOS team understands how they operate. We have a lot of new footed sweep runners for Western States. They don't, so we spent a lot of time talking about what a crossband repeater is, how it works, and the problems that you have with a crossband repeater. And so lastly, just wanted to say what Ralph said, which is thanks. I mean, W6EK is, I would say, one of our primary wide coverage repeaters. It always works, and we really appreciate that. And then I already mentioned it, the linking is important between VHF and UHF, and then the short carrier, it helps out for the sweep communications. Is there a phone patch on your repeater? Okay. So I don't think, I've never seen it used, but Ralph, I think, has mentioned in the past that we want to be able to use that if we need to. And the example is if we have a medical situation where we need to have medical professionals talk to someone at an aid station that's administering first aid, where it's beyond the capability of wherever that person is, and they don't have cell coverage. And so I don't know how to access it, and so.
So Richard's our trustee.
Okay, so I'll talk to Richard.
He'll help you out.
And then lastly, Tevis, as well as Western States, we're still looking for volunteers. And while I understand you have a field day event, and that's right on top of Western States, we do have 6-hour shifts at net control. And if you're not going to participate in both days and you're kind of interested in learning more about net control, I have a flyer back there. It has the links for signing up on the Tevis website for volunteering, which of course is in July, not on field day. And then Western States, if you happen to be around and are interested. I've also left some business cards over there for me, just in case anyone wants to talk more about anything that we're doing here. And that is it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh, yeah, questions? Sorry. Yes.
Do you have a website with a lot of this information on it?
We do, yeah. For Tevis, it's teviscup.org, and for Western States, it's WSER, so Western States Endurance Run.org. And if you go /communication on either site, you'll get to the communication section, and we have a large section that talks about the requirements, and we've been enhancing that, trying to add more information. And so there's some downloadable guides that talk about a lot of what I've already mentioned here. Any other questions? All right, that's it. Thank you, Ralph, Bill, Randy.